This is Pixelated Audio, and you're listening to Masters of VGM Volume 3.
All right, welcome back to Pixelated Audio, a podcast focusing on game music, its history, and the people behind it. We're your hosts. I'm Brian, and this is Gene.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back. We are here for the third round, or the third iteration of Masters of VGM, a now annual event which takes place across many podcasts, not just ours. It started off as just sort of a, hey, we should get together a list of some of our favorite composers, and it's since taken on a bit of a life of its own. This time around, we're focusing specifically on women composers, so we decided to make it a little bit more narrow and focus on some of the lesser-known women composers at Capcom.
Yes, this episode theme, we decided to kind of take a spin on it and focus on Capcom composers, but usually the ones that you don't hear as much about, but are notable in their own right, especially for contributions to game audio and the early sound of Capcom. So the first track we came in with was from a game called SonSon on the arcade, and this was the main title theme, and it was composed by Ayako Mori. And this was released in 1984 and developed and published by Capcom.
Yeah, I believe SonSon was, if not the very first, it's I think one of the first 5 or so arcade games that they made. It was very early for them. I think they made... What was it? X to X's, I think is what it was called before this. But, this is very early in the history of game audio. 1984, if folks remember our episode with They Create Worlds, this is right around the point where VGM actually starts to take shape and really sound like something more than just jingles. And even still, this is a fairly short track. It's about 30 seconds. But you can start to hear, there's some cool elements going on, even for as simple as it is.
Yeah, I think there were only a few games that came out in the early 80s by Capcom, and this was one of them. So it was something that, really has a nice little jingle, and it's fun, it's catchy, and it really gets you into the arcade scene. I mean, this is, it kind of reminds me of, there's almost like there's like an Ice Climbers element to this game, and there's like a handful of games, Popeye, like a bunch of different games that kind of fall into this category. But it is a really fun game. It was released on the NES, I think slightly later, maybe 85, 86.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a cool game, cool soundtrack, and we are going to be playing a few tracks from each of the composers that we chose today. So this first one was from SonSon, and then what do we got next, Gene?
So the next one, I think a lot of people will recognize. It's from the original Ghosts and Goblins. It's sort of the main theme. But it's funny. This song has showed up in so many different games. I've heard this version probably the least out of all of them. I'm much more used to the later versions, specifically like Super Ghouls and Ghosts and things like that. But this is from the 1985 original. Let me just make sure I've got the title. Ghosts and Goblins. Ghosts and Goblins, Ghouls and Ghosts. There's the titles have always been a little bit funny like that.
Yeah, in Japanese, this is Makaimura. So let's take a listen. This is from stage 1. All right, that was Ghosts and Goblins Stage 1 from the arcade, released in 1985, I believe. Yeah.
It was, yeah, and has now become one of the most iconic themes, certainly from that series, but even in retro arcade games, I think a lot of people hear that first couple of bars and they both smile and get frustrated because it is a hard series.
It's a super hard game. Yeah, it's a super hard game. So I love this version a lot. It's a lot more raw than some of the other stuff that came after. Obviously, technology's changing and stuff like that, and the tools have gotten better. And so you hear some really nice renditions, like later on for the Super Nintendo, stuff like that. But this is the classic going back to it. So yeah, dig it.
So I think it's interesting to note that, Capcom in particular has a very long history, even from the earliest days, of being very forthcoming about hiring female composers. It was not hard for us to find a lot of really amazing composers, but what's maybe more interesting is that I think she was either the first or one of the first composers that worked for Capcom. So 83, 84, I don't know what they had prior to that, but yeah, along with Tamayo Kawamoto, she is definitely part of the original Capcom sound team as it was sort of envisioned.
Yeah, and she was one of the first serving composers at Capcom, like Jim said, a key figure in shaping their early sound of a lot of the arcade games that Capcom worked on. SonSon, Volgus, Pirate Ship, Higemaru, 1942, this Gunsmoke, Trojan, the next track we're going to play, Sidearms. The interesting thing here that I wanted to bring up is the design team at Capcom used her name for the boss character, Ayako, in 1942, because apparently she was super tall. So I don't know if that's a compliment, but that's why they did it. So I thought that was interesting little nugget of information there. Oh, one thing I wanted to bring up we didn't talk about is the sound chip for this is actually using 2 of the YM2203 chips. And this next track that we're going to listen to from Trojan is also using the same sound chip configuration. So let's take a listen. This is stage 3 from Trojan.
That was stage 3 from the game Trojan. And, it does bear some similarity to Ghosts and Goblins, but it's got a bit of a rock and roll bass there. I think that's a pretty cool track.
Hey, there's that one part in there where it's like da 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 da, and you're just waiting for it to go the da 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 da, and then jump into this like kind of, I guess, New Jack Swingy kind of vibe. It's a cool track though. I like this. This game's really cool too.
Yeah, it's a little hard. I only actually played it recently in one of those Capcom collections that it's like released on everything. It was like not cyberpunk, like Mad Max-esque future where, marauders are taking over the city. The usual late 80s or mid 80s kind of thing. Fist of the North Star. So what does the name of the game in Japanese mean? Tatakai no Banka? Because I doubt that translates directly into Trojan. And that was common to do these translations,
Yeah, no, it's not related at all. Banka is like a funeral kind of chant or song, in like an elegy. And Tatakai is like a fight or a battle. So it's like the elegy of a fight song or elegy of a fight or it doesn't make any sense, But it sounds cool in Japanese too. So
Yeah, I don't think this one did super well in the US. I have never seen one of these machines for sure in like person.
I think the only place I've seen this is at California Extreme.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
That would be the only place I've ever seen this. So, never saw it in the wild. Only a very controlled viewing place. So let's move on to our next composer here.
So moving to the next composer down the list, we have Yuki Iwai. And we're going to be playing a track from one of my favorite games growing up, Mega Man X2, where she was the lead composer. And this is the track Crystal Snail. That was the track Crystal Snail from Mega Man X2, and my personal favorite of the 3 X games on the Super Nintendo. As much as I love Mega Man X1, I think X2 is overall the best of the trilogy.
I would argue that you're probably right on that, actually.
I mean, nobody cares because it didn't innovate. It was like the same game with like a couple of extra features. But as an overall game, I feel like it's more cohesive. I like the soundtrack better. This one in particular is a really interesting track because it starts off, the first like figure is in 13/8, so 13 eighth notes before it repeats. It's a weird time signature throughout. It changes like to different, I think there's 3 different time signatures throughout. I could be wrong. Maybe there's 4, whatever, maybe it's 2. It's not 4/4, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, this was released in 1994 for the Super Nintendo, obviously. And Yuki Iwai composed this. Iwai-san is a former sound composer that was at the company from 91 to 2000, originally responsible for games like Aladdin, the Mega Man X series. But then from 95 worked on more of their arcade fighting titles like Street Fighter and the Versus series. And then around 2000, she went freelance and she formed a small sound unit called Wavelength Zeal with a former Capcom employee, Takayuki Iwai, which I don't believe is related at all, even though they have the same hometown and the same last name, the same kanji characters, and worked on the same team. But yeah, she's, was still doing stuff until pretty recently. Probably still active. Yeah, I mean, the list is pretty big. So it's Gargoyles Quest 2, which is awesome. There's Final Fight 2, which we were going to play a track from, but we just couldn't really narrow one down. Goof Troop, Aladdin, Mega Man X2, Street Fighter the movie, Marvel Superheroes, a bunch of Marvel games, Pocket Fighter, Tech Romancer is what we're going to play next, and some of the Street Fighter Alpha 3 and Street Fighter 3 Second Impact. Long list there.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I will just say as a little note, she was the primary composer on X2, but for a lot of the games that were mentioned, not all of them, but many of them, there's a lot of
contributing. Yeah, right. Yeah. There's a lot of contributing composers. Yeah. So, which was the case too. We were going to play something from. It was going to be like Project Justice Rival School, right? She had done some work for that, the arcade and Dreamcast version, but we weren't really sure which track, so we decided to take a rain check on that and play from another game here that we've never talked about. That is kind of rad. It's Tech Romancer. And this came out for the arcade in 1998 and was later ported to the Dreamcast worldwide in 2000. This track is called City Zone B, and it is the night or twilight track. So let's take a listen.
That was City Zone B, or the night version of that theme from the game Tech Romancer.
It's a really cool track. In fact, the soundtrack was new to me.
Yep.
Even though I kind of vaguely remember the game, going through the soundtrack, there's a lot of really cool tracks on there, like a lot of really good tracks. And the part where it kind of gets dark and it has those long sustained notes, and then the kind of up and down on the scales there. It's really pretty, really well done. It's got some really cool, just ear candy artifacts thrown in. I like this track a lot.
Yeah, me too. It's sort of like, in that kind of nostalgic, half-remembered way. Like, I haven't heard this soundtrack, but her signature composition style, particularly from like Marvel Superheroes, X-Men versus Street Fighter, Marvel Superheroes versus Street Fighter, that sound, the chord progressions, the echoey Q sound melody lines, it sounds like another version of that game. I just hadn't heard it, but it's so familiar.
If you listen to some of the other tracks in the soundtrack that are a little more upbeat, they do really, really sound like they could come out of like an X-Men vs. Street Fighter game or Marvel Superheroes or something that. This track was particularly on the slower end, more of those sustained, distorted guitars and stuff like that kind of 70s rock inspired lead guitar there. But it's just a really powerful track, and the whole soundtrack is actually surprising. It's something I want to put back on and listen to in its entirety. There's some other tracks that we were going to pop in here, and then we kind of last minute decided to just stick with this one. So yeah,
I did actually play this one in arcades, but I remember that it didn't stick around for very long because it was in that kind of, let's try to find something that's can beat out Tekken as like, the 3D fighter. It didn't really last. Not many people remember this game. It's fun. It's just not amazing.
Yeah, and there was hardly anything that really could come close to Virtua On anyway. And so I think that like they tried to do more of like a beat 'em up. Like this really is like a Project Rival Schools, but you're a mech kind of thing.
Yeah.
It just doesn't translate as well as maybe some of the other games or companies that pulled it off. So moving on, what do we got next, Gene?
So the next composer we have is Akari Kaida, and you're going to have to fill in some notes for me because I don't have that much on the composer herself, but I will start us off with one of my personal favorite games, and another underrated Mega Man game, Mega Man and Bass or Rockman and Forte.
It's one of my favorite games.
And honestly, I couldn't pick. There were 3 tracks that I really love that she wrote. She was not the only composer on this one. It was kind of a split project between a few, but I'll let you pick between Tenguman, Pirate Man, and Cold Man. They're all great.
Oh, I'm undecided. Gene, go ahead, pick. You pick these tracks. So.
Yeah, I know, but I like all of them for different reasons. I'm going to go with Tenguman.
Tenguman, let's do it. All right, that was Tenguman from Rockman and Forte, composed by Akari Kaida.
That bass line, dude. It is so good. I wish I could hear somebody play that live. This whole soundtrack, especially the tracks that she composed, Pirate Man, Cold Man, Ground Man, Tenguman, are so chill. It's like, it's almost a different vibe. It almost doesn't feel like the Mega Man series, but not in a bad way. Like, it still fits. It's just so different.
You know, it's funny because I feel like a lot of composers that studied or graduated in, especially like studies like jazz or jazz piano, which she did, have just so much sense of appropriation and bass. Like it's just so, it's done so like funky, groovy, mellow, relaxed, but it's all packaged up so nicely with just such a beautiful, like, wafting melody on top of it. Funny thing about her too is that she married an American guy, or no, I'm sorry, an Australian guy. And okay. So you might see her credits as like Akari Groves, but she's been like a lecturer at the Berklee College of Music in the US. She's really good at English apparently, and so she taught a whole like course or whatever, guest lecturing in English, so that's pretty awesome. She's been doing games and stuff from the beginning. She worked at Capcom. She was there for about 10 years, from 94 to 2005, mainly in charge of music for the Rockman EXE series. She's got a lot of different kind of composition and arrangement skills. We heard this one, which kind of has like a nice, almost like golf vibe to it.
A little bit, yeah. But
she's got a lot of orchestral stuff, very chiptune stuff. She really knows how to fit the genre of the scene that she's trying to match. Apparently, and this is new to me, is she sang the ending theme of Breath of Fire 3 with Yoshino Aoki. And also sang the soundtrack for Senko no Rondo Desires Roulette, a spinoff of Senko no Rondo. So
Yeah, the two of them actually worked together quite a lot on the Mega Man Battle Network series as time went on. But Akari Kaida started way back on Night Warriors, Darkstalker's Revenge, then later Cyberbots. I think the first big game that she worked on, as in like meaty, was Breath of Fire 3, although she was one of the sub-composers. Did not compose the bulk of the soundtrack, but I think about 8 or 9 tracks. I think this is probably, again, only added a few tracks to Mega Man and Bass or Rockman and Forte, but again, some of my favorites. And then went on to start doing a lot of heavy lifting for, the Mega Man Battle Network and some of the, like, Star Force and Mega Man ZX, like a lot of those later GBA DS games, a lot of contributions there.
And sadly, that's what I was telling you before we started recording, that I missed a lot of the Battle Network games and the, EXE and all that stuff. It's not that I wasn't interested, it's just that, I played a lot of Mega Man. This was new, different. I had moved on to different things, and it's like one of those things, you spend your time in one area or another, but you can't do it all. So I missed a lot of these. Apparently, Gene, you're saying these games are actually really great.
So I'm not the expert here. I only played through the first one pretty close to when it came out. I on my GBA SP, I think must have been 2003 or 4. I really liked it. It was so, and I said this off mic, but I'm not a huge fan of deck builder games. You have randomized cards, Metal Gear Acid, all these. There was so many of these things that were starting to come out in the 2000s because everybody wanted to make a collectible card game out of a video game, and then they would make video games out of collectible card games. It was madness.
Yes.
But I actually thought the game had pretty good, like, it wasn't super random. Like, battles didn't feel like they were totally RNG based, and I thought they were fair, and the aesthetic was really cool. You're controlling this, like, cyberspace Mega Man avatar. You're like, instead of a Pokemon, you have like essentially a Tamagotchi Mega Man that fights other bosses and things in like I think it was a 6x6 or 3x6 grid, something like that. It held my attention through the entire game. I never got around to the other ones, but I always was like, I know these are good. I should come back to this series. And you can come back to it if you want to. They've released the collection on Switch recently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, interesting fact here is that more recently, well, not that recently, about 10 years ago, sure. 2013, she formed a vocal unit called Pined, or Pined. The caps are all weird on it, with Takenobu Mitsuyoshi-san. So did a few vocal stuff with him.
Huh.
Pretty cool. Yeah.
That is pretty cool. The other thing, it's not every composer that we've talked about, but a lot of composers that we are talking about came back in Mega Man 10. Like, most of the composers that Capcom has hired over the last 30 years contributed a song to Mega Man 9 and Mega Man 10. I know Yuko Takahara was in there. We talked about her last year. Akari Kaida did a song for Mega Man 10. I'm pretty sure the other composers we're talking about did as well. I don't have the records pulled up, but it was, I thought that was really cool. Like, they didn't have to go back and say like, hey, you worked for us. Do you want to do a track for us? But it was just like a nice way to pay respect to not just the women, of course, but all of the composers that have worked at Capcom over the years, which... Yeah,
it was super cool. Yeah. Man, now I got to find some stuff that they did, or that she did with Mitsuyoshi-san.
Oh, yeah, that's...
It's got to be wild.
One of the coolest things about this company is obviously Capcom developed a really cool, just pool of composers. There's just so many of them that you start to hear influences almost from each other. Like, when I was listening to the Techromancer track, I'm like, this almost sounds like some of the stuff that was in Mega Man X3, but that wasn't her.
It's almost like they created, like you were saying, it's almost like they created like this family of friends. It's almost not work anymore because they're all like the conversations. Because I actually met Mitsuyoshi-san for the first time, 4 or 5 months ago. It was a really wild experience. Like, talking to him too, like we both had to go to the restroom. We were talking to each other about something really dumb. We were standing like in adjacent like urinals and talking. It was like the weirdest out of mind experience. Anyways, but they have just such a good rapport and connection with each other. They treat each other like family. And that's really, I think, something that Capcom did very well. I don't know for the rest of the company as far as the design team and engineering and stuff like that, but as far as their sound units go, they were always so tight knit. There's, I wouldn't say there's a lot of other companies, Capcom, they had theirs, but like, Konami had the kind of their version, sound team JDK and stuff, but it's still, I mean, these are just game companies, and they created these really strong bonds between the composers. And you hear, like what Gene was saying, these different influences kind of off of each other, and kind of building up, their own influences off of their colleagues' influences. So it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I am not going to be the person to do this, but as I was reading through all these various Wikipedia pages, the same like 9 names kept coming up. So they were clearly all working together on each other's games with each other. Like, I feel like this is probably, compared to even other Japanese video game companies from like the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, I feel like Capcom really made sure that there was like kind of, I don't know if it was a mentor relationship or a pair, but it feels like there was a lot of collaboration. I feel like in other companies, I've seen more of there's kind of a single composer, and then maybe a couple of other tracks are contributed, but it doesn't feel nearly as
family oriented.
Family or not, just like interconnected in a way where they're all sort of working to one collective pool of music almost.
That's kind of what I'm saying. It's like they're almost like they move as a single body, right?
Yeah.
Like, even though there's like different people contributing in different places, like they're kind of a unit, a cohesive unit. So almost like a family in a sense. That said, we've talked a lot about our current composer, but we have still a few more to go. So let's move on to our next track. Actually, we have another one from Kaida-san. So let's play one from. We have another. What are we going to play next?
So I dug this one up, which I thought was kind of a neat one. This is from Tricky Sliders, which is a snowboarding game, aka Trickin' Snowboarder. Another kind of, everybody was trying to get those extreme sports games in the late 90s. Yeah. So be prepared for a little bit of light jungle, a little bit of misplaced samples. This is the track No, which you will hear plenty throughout this one.
All right, that was No from Tricky Sliders, composed by Akari Kaida for Tricky Sliders. Dude, you weren't kidding, dude. I had not heard this. I didn't even know you snuck this one in. I did not hear this one, and I would have, vetoed this one right away. But
it's you know what? It is extremely of its time, but it's a well put together track. And like a lot of the other things in this episode, when are we ever going to have a chance to talk about Tech Romancer, tricky sliders? We're really digging deep for this one.
Yeah. What was that scream all of a sudden? Like where are they in this?
Yeah, it was just it was as they said in The Simpsons, it was the style at the time, right? To throw in random samples.
Yeah, just like snowboarding through hell or what? Like, I'm not sure. Anyways, so Akari Kaida. Yeah, moving on.
I think that about covers that. We're on to our last composer already. This has been breezing by.
Yeah. So this we have some really good tracks here. Actually, I'm really excited about this one. The next composer we want to talk about is Yoshino Aoki. And Yoshino Aoki has been at Capcom for quite a while too, doing a lot of stuff for the Mega Man Battle networks, like Gene had mentioned earlier. And so we have a track here. We have a bunch, actually. Gene, what did you want to start with? Because I was really digging Blastman Stage.
I say we start with that.
Let's start with that. So this is Blastman Stage from Mega Man Battle Network 6. All right, that was Blastman's Stage from Mega Man Battle Network 6, because they made like 1 million of these games.
All on GBA, yeah.
Yeah, all on GBA. Composed by Yoshino Aoki for the Game Boy Advance.
Yeah, so we started with 6, but technically she joined on 2, Mega Man Battle Network 2, worked on 2, 3, 5, 6, must have been busy during 4, and then Star Force 1, 2, and 3, which is kind of the continuation, essentially, of Battle Network, but on the DS. Kind of like the Mega Man Zero, Mega Man ZX, that sort of thing. It's really the same series, but, change platform thing. That was kind of the bulk of what she worked on, but she also, going back, had some light contributions to Mega Man X3, Breath of Fire 3, Marvel vs. Capcom Pocket Fighter, Mega Man Legends 2 was just special thanks, but, has been involved since around the same time as Akari Kaida. They worked very closely together for a while, and in fact, as we mentioned, Akari Kaida started the Mega Man Battle Network. She took the first one and then kind of handed off the reins to Yoshino Aoki.
Yeah. Yoshino Aoki was part of Capcom from 1995 to about 2006. We talked about the titles that she had worked on, and then after that, she went freelance and continued to do some stuff for Capcom, like the Star Force series and stuff like that. And then in 2009, she founded a small company called Unique Note with a former composer, Tetsuya Shibata. And they, I believe Aoki is director of the company now. But anyways, did some stuff for Earthseeker and Healing Master, Bell Melody, and a few other things. In addition to game music, though, she's also worked on stage music at Capcom.
Nice.
And is a really good singer.
Yeah, and like many other composers, has continued to work on games today. In fact, she had a couple of arrangements in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Looks like worked on Final Fantasy 15. So this episode is not necessarily composers whose career started and ended at Capcom. Many of them have continued to have careers afterwards. It's just we're focusing on the Capcom bit mostly.
Yep. So what track do we have next here? We talked about Star Force a little bit, and I think you wanted to play a track from that, right?
Yeah, so I wanted to specifically play Mega Man Star Force. So we heard the previous one, which was Game Boy Advance, that kind of crunchy, low bit rate plus square waves. Now we're here on the DS. The audio fidelity is a little bit better, but same kind of sound palette, just a little bit brighter. So this is the track from the game Mega Man Star Force 1. It's called, what's the full title? It's got kind of an odd name, if I remember correctly. Give me a sec. Now Study, which plays in the school in the Libra scales stage. And I read some YouTube comments, and it's essentially like you're in a school that's turned against you and like books are attacking you and stuff. So
that was like my high school, man. Anyways.
Oh, yeah, totally. All right. So this is Now Study for Mega Man Star Force.
All right, that was Now Study from Mega Man Star Force, composed by Yoshino Aoki.
And that was for the DS, and I guess it released in 2006 originally, late 2006 in Japan. Honestly, I don't hear many people talking about this series, but I definitely got to say, she did some great work.
It's a good soundtrack, man. That's a really good soundtrack. I mean, it's pretty new to me. I didn't listen to the Star Force either until just before doing this episode, and that's pretty good stuff. I mean, there's some little cliched like drum fills and stuff in there, but man, good track though.
Oh yeah, I gotta say, we don't always talk about this in this way exactly, but remember, she started working on Mega Man Battle Network 2. By the time we get to Mega Man Star Force, she has like definitely hit her stride. So high consistency, really, really great work. That entire trilogy of games has really, really good music all the way throughout. So it's definitely worth checking out if you're not familiar with it. Just look up the OSTs. They're well worth a listen for sure.
Yeah, so that just about wraps up the show. We've had a number of tracks and a number of composers that we don't really hear so much from, so it's really enjoyable to go through. And I hope everyone listening had learned something new or heard something they hadn't heard before, and also inspires you to go out and listen to some of these soundtracks in their entirety. We only scratch the surface and we talk about the composers and stuff, but the whole idea is really to inspire you to listen to something kind of on your own and really find something that really works for you. And as always, share it back with us. Let us know, what you like, what you don't like, and we can maybe shuffle that into an episode and let somebody else know. It's a kind of community of video game music fans, and do want to give a shout out to everybody else who's taking part in the Masters of VGM month, doing an episode and stuff like that. All of our friends and colleagues that are also doing their stuff, please listen to their stuff. They're going to be playing stuff completely different from us. And there's going to be a lot of really fun tracks at the end of this month. So definitely take a listen and let us know what you find in another podcast so we can go jump on that too. So here we have another track taking out the show here. Gene, got anything else?
I do, yeah. Before we sign off for the night or for the day, whatever time it is for you, make sure to check out some of the other Masters of VGM shows, not just from us, but from previous years. I think it's a really interesting way to do, what we would call an expansion pack, focusing on, either a specific set of composers or, just a slightly different framing. And everybody has a slightly different take on how they do this show. And it's always a lot of fun for us to dig into something that, we wouldn't necessarily look for specifically. And, I think we talk about this a lot. Capcom is a game company that has an amazing pedigree of musicians. I think not even just the women composers don't get enough credit, which they definitely don't. But in general, I think Capcom composers always, we know about the music, but it's always very commoditized. We hear about it and it's like, oh, I love the theme from this song or whatever, but we don't always hear about the people who wrote the music. And there's so many great composers there. And
it's really hard too, because like you said, they work as such a collective unit, and so many different people contribute to, the same game, that really is hard to kind of narrow it down to like one person specifically. So when we kind of take a step back and kind of look through a different lens at some of the artists, the composers, and what they've contributed to and what songs they've done music for, then we can start kind of really honing in on their sound and also where they got their inspiration from their colleagues. And so listening to like an episode like this is really a great experience for us, because we can go through and kind of make new pathways, new connections kind of to ourselves of maybe how some of this music was composed. And so I think it's really cool. Like Gene said, go back and listen to the past episodes from the Masters of VGM, as well as our colleagues who are putting out episodes as well this month.
Okay, so with that, we've got one last track, and this one's a little bit different from the others. So all of the tracks we've played so far have been composed by the women we've mentioned, but this one is actually sung by Yoshino Aoki. I think some people already know where I'm going with this one. So in the game Mega Man Battle and Chase, which was a rather unknown Japanese-only kart racing type game for the PS1, that is another game with an amazing soundtrack. But this track came back in Marvel vs. Capcom 1 and became essentially synonymous with Roll's theme. So Yoshino Aoki sung the lyrics to this, the original Japanese, and it was composed by Yoshinori Ono, who we won't go into on this show, but enjoy Roll's theme from the original Mega Man Battle and Chase as we close out the show. And yeah,
that's it. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back in the next week or so for our next episode. Tsutaete!